The dust on Karis 9 tasted like old copper and burnt plastic, and Marin Voss had been tasting it for 3 days before she found the first survivor. She almost missed him. He was buried under 2 meters of collapsed prefab wall in what used to be the Eastern Processing District, and the only reason she stopped was because her boots crunched differently over that particular stretch of rubble. A hollow sound, a resonance that didn't match the dead compaction of everything else. She crouched down, pressed her palm to the debris, and felt the faintest warmth radiating up through the concrete and twisted rebar. She stayed very still for a long moment, listening. Then she started digging with her hands. It took 40 minutes. Her crew came when she pinged them, and they dug too, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say yet. Either there was someone down there, or there wasn't. Either the warmth was a person, or it was a ruptured heating coil, or a smoldering fire pocket, and you didn't narrate the maybe. You just dug. The man they pulled out was named Dav Oren. He was 61 years old, former colony administrator, and he had kept himself alive in a reinforced utility crawl space for 72 hours on 2 protein bars, a half-liter of water, and what he described once they had him upright and hydrated and wrapped in a thermal sheet as a profound and detailed anger. They didn't even land, he said. His voice was abraded down to something raw and fundamental. They just orbited and fired for about 4 hours. That was all it took. Marin sat across from him in the cargo bay of the Esk, their salvage hauler, and let him talk. Around her, her crew moved quietly, Pell checking the man's vitals, Casso running a scan on the settlement perimeter, young Breck standing in the hatchway with his arms folded and his jaw working like he was trying to grind something down to powder. Outside, through the open ramp, the ruins of Karis 9 stretched in every direction under a pale yellow sky. 47,000 people, 3 generations of colony work, gone in 4 hours. How many ships? Marin asked. 2, Oren said. Maybe 3. I couldn't see clearly. The scanning array went down in the first pass. He paused and looked at his hands, which were wrapped in med tape and still trembling faintly. 2 ships is all it took. 2 ships to erase 47,000 people. Marin nodded slowly. She already knew this, had already worked the math in her head during the approach, had already counted the craters and mapped the firing patterns and understood what kind of force had done this. She knew the Varek. Anybody in the outer systems knew the Varek. They had been pushing the boundary for 6 years now, probing, testing, occasionally destroying a small installation or an unmanned relay station, always pulling back before the compact could muster a formal response. Karis 9 was the first full colony, the first 47,000. There'll be more, Oren said. It wasn't a question. He said it with the flat certainty of a man who had spent 30 years in colonial administration and knew how these things worked. This was a demonstration. They're showing the compact what they can do. Karis 9 was the message. The next one will be the demand. We have to report this, Pell said from behind Marin. She was the ship's medic and the most practically minded person aboard. Not cold, just precise. She had a gift for identifying the single most necessary thing in any given moment and stating it without drama. The compact has to know. They may not know yet. They know, Marin said. Then they need to respond. They'll respond. Marin stood and looked out through the open ramp at the ruined colony. A plume of smoke still rose from somewhere near the old water reclamation facility. The yellow sky was very still. The question is how long that takes, and what happens to the rest of the outer settlements in the meantime. She didn't say the other thing. The other thing was that the Esk was a salvage hauler, 900 tons unladen, officially licensed for debris recovery and civilian asset reclamation. Her crew was 4 people. Herself, Pell, Casso, and Breck. They had a single-point defense autocannon mounted on the dorsal hull, mainly for dealing with debris fields, and a small cache of flares and proximity mines left over from a job 6 months ago that she hadn't gotten around to filing the disposal paperwork on. They were not, by any reasonable definition, a military asset. She had been thinking, very quietly, about what they were. Casso was the one who found the Varek signal. He was their system specialist, long-limbed, perpetually unhurried, possessed of a patience for data that bordered on the devotional. He had been running passive scans since they arrived, building a picture of the electromagnetic environment around Karis 9, and on the afternoon of the first day he came to Marin, with a tablet and a particular expression that she had learned to read as, "You need to see this, but I want you to be sitting down first." She was not sitting down. She was on the exterior hull, helping Breck run a manual check of the point defense mount. She climbed down when she saw Casso's expression. "Show me," she said. He showed her. The signal was faint, a residual carrier wave in the upper microwave band. the kind of thing that washed through the background of any system that had recently seen heavy traffic. But Casso had been patient with it, had run it through 3 different filters, and what had emerged was unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in the outer systems. The frequency signature, the modulation pattern, the specific way the signal degraded at range. Varric Fleet Communication Protocol. They're still here, Marin said. Not here, but close. Casso pointed to the edge of the tablet display, where his ranging calculation was mapped over a local star chart. Holding position about 12 light minutes out, beyond the gas giant, could be waiting for something, could be doing a damage assessment, could be getting ready to do it again, Breck said. He had followed Marin down from the hull and was looking over Casso's shoulder. His voice was very controlled, the way a thing is controlled when significant force is being applied to keep it that way. That's one possibility, Casso said. How long have they been there? Marin asked. At least since we arrived. Probably longer. The signal suggests a holding pattern, not an approach vector. Marin looked at the star chart for a long time. The gas giant was a smear of amber and white at the edge of the display. Behind it, invisible at this range, 2 or 3 ships full of Varric waiting for something, for confirmation, for orders, for the right moment. She thought about Davorin in the cargo bay, wrapped in a thermal sheet, his hands still trembling. She thought about 47,000 people who had woken up 3 days ago to an ordinary morning. They're going to hit another settlement, she said. Not a question. The logic was simple and brutal. You didn't move a fleet asset this far into the outer systems for a single strike. You came, you struck, you demonstrated, and then you demonstrated again. And the second demonstration was always aimed at a different target, so that the terror spread laterally instead of concentrating in one place. I've been thinking the same thing, Casso said quietly. Nearest settlement, Tereth Station, 40,000 people, 11 light hours from here. He paused. A compact patrol vessel could reach Tereth in about 36 hours if dispatched immediately. Our nearest signal relay can bounce a distress call to Compact Command in about 4 hours, and then they dispatch, and then 36 hours. Marin was still looking at the star chart. What's the Varric approach vector to Tereth if they leave from their current position? Casso was quiet for a moment running the calculation. 22 hours, maybe 20. Marin nodded. She had already known what the numbers were going to say. Marin, Pell said. She had come out from the ship at some point during this conversation and was standing at the base of the ramp, watching. Her voice carried the specific weight of someone who has identified the single most necessary thing and is trying to decide whether to say it. What are you thinking? Marin turned away from the star chart and looked at her crew. Pell, precise and careful. Casso, long-limbed and patient. Breck, with his jaw still working and his eyes bright with something that was mostly fury and partly fear, and possibly a small amount of something else, something harder to name. She had known these 3 people for 4 years. They had hauled debris together across 6-star systems. They had, on 3 separate occasions that she did not discuss with anyone, done things that were not strictly covered by their salvage license. I'm thinking we need to send the distress call first, she said. And then? Pell asked. Marin looked back at the star chart, at the amber smear of the gas giant, at the invisible ships behind it. And then I want to talk about what a 900-ton salvage hauler looks like on Varric military sensors, she said. They sent the distress call. Casso encoded it with everything. The attack data, the signal intercept, the estimated position of the Varric fleet, the projected timeline to Tereth. He flagged it priority 1 and burned it through every relay in range, which meant it would reach Compact Command in 4 hours and a response would be on its way eventually. Whether the response would arrive in time was a different question. One that Marin was pointedly not asking herself, because the answer was almost certainly no, and she needed her thinking to be clear. While Casso sent the call, she sat at the cargo bay table with Davorin and asked him questions, not about the attack. She had already extracted everything useful from that. She asked him about Karis 9's infrastructure, the power grid, the industrial equipment, what had been in the processing district before the Varric turned it to rubble, what had been in the storage depots near the landing fields. What, specifically, had the colony been built to do? Oren was a practical man despite his shock. He answered her questions with increasing focus, and somewhere around the second hour she could see him processing what she was asking, making the same connections she was making, and his expression cycling through disbelief, and something that was not quite hope but was in the same neighborhood. The mass driver, he said at last, that's what you're asking about. Tell me about it. Karis 9 was a mining and ore processing colony. We had a Type 4 electromagnetic mass driver for launching refined ore to the transit platforms in high orbit. It was, he stopped and thought carefully, intact when they hit. They targeted the residential and administrative sections. Processing district took some damage from secondary fires, but the core infrastructure may still be functional. What's the range on a Type 4? In a vacuum with a shaped projectile, about 800,000 kilometers. Ballistic, no propulsion. But the slug mass is, he paused again. You're not thinking about sending ore. No, the calibration is completely wrong for. I know. I have Casso. Oren looked at her for a long time. He was a man who had spent 30 years administering a colony, which meant he was a man who was accustomed to impossible problems, and the creative violence that practical people bring to bear on them. He looked at her, and then he looked at his hands, and then he looked up again. The targeting system will need a lock, he said. You'd need a precise vector. We have the signal intercept. We can refine it. The Varric ships will detect an active targeting emission from the mass driver. They'll move. Yes, that's why the timing matters. He was quiet for a while. Outside, the yellow sky was dimming toward evening. Somewhere in the ruins, something shifted and fell. My daughter lives on Terrath Station, Oren said. Marin said nothing. All right, he said. Let me tell you about the mass driver. The processing district was 3 kilometers from where they'd found Oren, and getting there meant picking through 2 kilometers of collapsed urban infrastructure in the dark because the power grid was down and they had headlamps and a single portable generator that Breck carried on his back without complaint, the way Breck carried most physical burdens. Quietly, efficiently, as though his body existed primarily to be useful. Marin led. Oren walked beside her, pointing the way, occasionally stopping to recalibrate against landmarks that no longer existed and had to be reconstructed from memory. Pell and Casso came behind carrying equipment. Nobody talked much. The ruins had a specific quality of silence that was different from the ordinary silence of an empty place. It was weighted, full of recent absence, the kind of silence that presses against the ears. Marin had been in ruins before. She had salvaged plenty of dead installations, but those had been dead from age or accident, not from intent, and the difference was not small. They found the mass driver facility in slightly better shape than she had dared hope. The main launch rail was intact, 140 meters of superconducting electromagnetic track, angled at 40 degrees off the horizontal, aimed at the sky. The power coupling housing was cracked but not destroyed. The targeting array was functional, according to Casso's diagnostics, which he ran with the methodical patience of someone who did not let hope or dread affect his reading of instruments. It's workable, he said, standing at the base of the control pillar with his tablet in both hands, reading. The calibration is going to be a problem. This thing is built to accelerate refined ore slugs in the range of 10 to 40 kilograms. We need to use something considerably larger and considerably less aerodynamic. How much is in the storage depot? Marin asked Oren. The processed ore? Maybe 2,000 tons, depending on what was damaged. He thought for a moment. The raw ore feedstock is different. Heavier, denser, less uniform. About 800 tons in the primary feed magazine. We're not launching ore, Casso said. He had that look again, the patient, methodical look of a man solving a problem that is technically very interesting, even if the circumstances surrounding it are terrible. We're launching mass. The specific composition matters less than the total kinetic energy delivered to the target. Can we calibrate for a hit at 12 light minutes? Marin asked. Casso made a noise that was not yes and was not no. In principle, the physics is not the problem. The targeting is the problem. At that range, even a small angular error at the launch point translates to a miss of tens of thousands of kilometers. We need a very precise vector, and we have a passive signal intercept, which gives us a general location but not a precise one. What if the target moved toward us? Breck said. He had set the generator down and was standing back, listening with his arms folded. It was the first thing he'd said in over an hour. Then the vector precision requirement dropped significantly, Casso said. If they're close enough. They'll come, Breck said. He looked at Marin. Won't they, if we give them a reason? Marin looked at him steadily. Breck was 24 years old. He had joined her crew 2 years ago off a station in the Vela sector, where he had been doing piecework between the kind of jobs that don't have formal job titles. She had hired him because he was strong and careful, and seemed constitutionally incapable of panicking. And in 2 years he had never once made her regret that decision. That's the shape of it, she said. You want to use the esque? As bait, Pell said. Her voice was neutral. Not afraid, not angry. Neutral in the way of someone who is looking at a thing very clearly and wants to make sure everyone else is looking at it the same way. We light up, we ping them. We get them to move in close enough for Casso to get a firing solution, and then we fire the mass driver. Yes. And then they know where the mass driver is and they destroy it. Yes. Which is why we need more than one shot. Silence. The facility hummed faintly around them. The passive systems cycling, the power coupling doing what undamaged systems do, maintaining themselves against the day they'd be needed. Multiple slugs, Casso said slowly. He was looking at the feed magazine with an expression Marin had learned to recognize as the face of a man who is doing math and finding it increasingly interesting. If we preload the magazine and calibrate for a spread pattern, not a single precise shot but a dispersion pattern across the projected target volume, the probability of impact goes up significantly. How many shots before they get a lock on us? Marin asked. 4, Casso said. Maybe 5 if we're quick. The targeting emission from the first shot will tell them exactly where we are. After that, it's a question of how fast their response is. 4 shots, Breck said, into a ship that can take out a colony. 4 shots of a Type 4 mass driver delivering approximately 12,000 tons of kinetic energy per second to a target volume of. Casso stopped. I want to be honest with you. I don't know what the Varric ship armor specification is. I know what the physics says. I know what that kind of kinetic delivery does to steel and composite and most materials humans use for hull construction. Whether Varric armor is something different, I cannot tell you. Nobody's ever hit a Varric warship with an industrial mass driver before, Oren said, almost to himself. No, Casso agreed. They haven't. Marin looked around at her crew, Pell's neutral face, Casso's mathematical calm. Breck's barely contained fury and barely contained fear. And that other thing, the harder-to-name thing, that she was beginning to recognize now as a kind of iron refusal. Not bravery exactly. Something more fundamental. The specific human inability to simply accept that 47,000 people died and 40,000 more were going to die, and the correct response was to wait 36 hours for someone with more resources and a proper military designation to handle it. I need you to decide, Marin said. Not me deciding for you. All of us deciding together. Because once we start this, there's no part where they forget we're here. Pell spoke first. I'm a medic. I'm practically useless in a firefight. She paused. I'd like Terrath Station's 40,000 people to not need a medic. So yes. Casso looked up from his tablet. The targeting problem is interesting, he said, which was as close as he ever got to enthusiasm. Breck uncrossed his arms. He looked at Marin with those young, furious, somehow steady eyes. Somebody has to, he said. Marin nodded once. Then let's get to work. They worked through the night. It was the kind of work that is not dramatic in the moment, but which, looked back on, takes on a specific texture, the texture of people doing things past the edge of what they know how to do, improvising from first principles, making decisions that they cannot fully evaluate in real time, and will only be able to judge in retrospect if there is a retrospect to have. Casso recalibrated the targeting array, working from the passive signal data and running probability distributions that he explained to Marin in patient detail because she insisted on understanding each step. Not because she could check his work, but because understanding the reasoning was the only way to evaluate the risks. Oren through the Mad through this driver's operational parameters, filling in the gaps in the technical documentation that had burned with the admin building. Breck worked the physical end, loading the feed magazine, pre-positioning the launch slugs, doing with his hands in his back what the automated systems couldn't do. Without power they didn't have enough of. Pell set up a triage station in the mass driver control room. She was matter-of-fact about it. She had assessed the available medical supplies, identified the most likely injury scenarios, laid out her equipment in order of probable use. Nobody commented on this. It was a practical thing to do, and Pell was a practical person. Marin moved between all of them, checking, adjusting, making the 100 small decisions that no one else could make, because they required holding the entire picture in mind simultaneously. The signal, data, and the targeting parameters, and the loading schedule, and the its position, and the timing, and the 10,000 ways this could go wrong, and the 3 ways it might go right. She didn't sleep. She drank bad coffee from a thermos she'd brought from the ship, and she thought, and she moved, and she drank more bad coffee. Around 3 in the morning, ship's time, she climbed to the top of the mass driver housing, and sat for a few minutes looking at the sky. The yellow had gone to black, and the stars were out, very bright and very clear in the thin atmosphere of Keras 9, undimmed by the light pollution that had been here 3 days ago. She could pick out the gas giant near the horizon, a faint amber smear. Behind it, 12 light minutes away, Varric ships waiting. She thought about why she was doing this. Not strategically, she had already worked through the strategy until it was as solid as she could make it. She thought about the why underneath the strategy, the thing that had made her start digging. When she heard the hollow sound under the rubble, the thing that made her look at Davorin and his trembling hands and think, not again. Instead of, nothing to be done. She had been in the outer systems for 11 years. She had seen 6 settlements in that time die from neglect or mismanagement or disaster. She had salvaged 2 of them, pulled the useful material out and moved on the way you do. It was the work. You didn't take it personally, but this was personal. She was not sure exactly when it had become personal, whether it was the hollow sound under the rubble or the yellow sky or Oren saying, "My daughter lives on Tereth Station," in the same flat voice he used for everything else. But it was personal now, and she had found, over her 11 years in the outer systems, that personal was frequently more useful than professional when the situation was sufficiently impossible. She climbed back down and went back to work. By dawn, they were ready, or ready enough, which is a different thing, but it was the best they were going to get. Casso had the targeting array locked on the Varric position, and had built a firing solution around a dispersion pattern, 12 launch points spread over a projected interception volume, timed to arrive at the target zones in a sequence that would maximize the chance of at least 3 impacts. He was careful to explain that maximize the chance was not the same thing as guarantee, and Marin was careful to acknowledge this. She had a general policy against making plans that depended on guarantees. The Esk was parked 2 kilometers from the mass driver facility, which was as close as Marin wanted the ship to be when the Varric started returning fire. Oren had stayed with Casso at the control pillar. Pell was in the triage station. Breck was at the feed magazine. Marin went back to the Esk. Alone. She climbed into the pilot seat and ran through the pre-start sequence, which she had done so many times in 11 years that her hands moved through it without requiring her attention. The Esk came alive around her. The familiar vibration of the drive cycling up, the particular smell of the air recyclers kicking in, the console displays filling with data. She was home, in the specific way that a working ship is home to the person who has lived in it long enough. She set her comms to the crew frequency and checked that everyone was in position. Ready, said. Brex, ready, Casso said. And then after a brief pause, Marin, one thing, tell me. The signal we've been tracking, I've been refining the ranging data for the last 6 hours. I have a much more precise position now. A pause. There are 3 ships, not 2. Marin sat with this for a moment. 3 ships, not 2. The dispersion firing solution had been built around 2 targets. She did the recalculation in her head, quickly, dirtily, knowing it was dirty, and doing it anyway because there wasn't time for clean. Can you rebuild the dispersion pattern for 3 targets in? She looked at the chronometer. 15 minutes? 12, Casso said. Then do it. I'll hold the lure for 12 minutes. She paused. Don't miss. I'll try not to, he said, which was exactly what she'd expected him to say. She turned on every active sensor the Esk had. Navigation radar, debris avoidance lidar, the commercial transponder that broadcast their registration and class and license data out to a range of about 200,000 kilometers. She turned on the external work lights, which were high-powered and designed to illuminate debris fields in dark space and which would be visible at considerable range as a sudden bright point of light appearing where no light had been before. She boosted the transponder signal to maximum. She made the Esk as loud and bright and visible as she could possibly make it. Then she waited. She had been in difficult situations before. In 11 years of outer system salvage work, difficult situations were approximately 30% of the job. But she had a specific memory of the worst moment she had ever experienced on the job, 4 years ago, when she had been deep inside a derelict processing station, trying to cut a pressure valve free, and the cutting torch had failed, and the valve had been holding back approximately 200 atmospheres of industrial gas, and the station had groaned around her in a way that suggested structural compromise, and she had been absolutely alone and absolutely clear that she might die, and had found, in that moment, a strange and grounded calm. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something larger than fear, some foundational certainty that she was going to do the next thing, and the thing after that, and keep doing things until either she was out or she was not. She felt that now, the same strange grounded calm, the same certainty about the next thing. 4 minutes after she lit up, the Varric ships moved. She saw it in the ranging data, 3 contacts previously stationary at 12 light minutes, now accelerating. Not a full combat approach, not yet. A repositioning move, the way a predator repositions when something unexpected appears in its territory. They were coming to look. They would want to understand what a live active transponder was doing on the surface of a colony they had already destroyed. They would be curious, and then suspicious, and then, when their suspicion crystallized into certainty, they would fire. The question was how long the crystallization took. She kept her hands on the controls and watched the contacts advance on the ranging display. They were moving fast, much faster than she had expected, a sustained high G burn that was closing the 12 light-minute gap at a rate that recalculated her timeline significantly. Her hands on the controls, she opened the crew channel. Casso. I see them, he said. Moving faster than projected. I need 3 more minutes. You have 2, she said. Hurry. The contacts kept coming. They weren't being subtle about it. A full power approach by 3 warships, aimed directly at the Esk's broadcast position. They had identified her as something worth investigating, possibly worth eliminating as a matter of hygiene, which was exactly what she had wanted. She watched them come and held the transponder on, and kept her hands ready on the flight controls. Marin, Pell said over the comm. Her voice was still neutral. They've achieved targeting lock on us. I'm reading targeting emissions. I know, Marin said. They'll fire in approximately, I know. She watched the contacts on the display. She had a very precise understanding of the moment she needed to move, and a precise awareness of the consequences of moving too early versus too late, and both sets of consequences were unpleasant in different ways, and she was holding that awareness very lightly, at arm's length, where it couldn't interfere with her judgment. She breathed in, she breathed out. Casso, she said. 1 minute, he said. I need 1 minute. Start the firing sequence, she said. Fire when ready. Don't wait for me to say go. She cut the transponder. Then she fired the Esk's main drives at maximum thrust, pointed not at the Varric ships, but at 90 degrees to them. A lateral burn, away from the mass driver facility, drawing the incoming fire with her as she moved. The salvage hauler leaped under her, 900 tons of metal and fuel and cargo responding to the drives with a shudder that she felt in her teeth, and she was already calculating the evasion arc as the Varric ships adjusted their targeting to track her new position. The first shot came as a column of light. She saw it on the external cameras before she heard or felt anything. A coherent energy beam, coherent the way lightning is coherent, focused and terrible, passing 200 meters behind the Esk. Because she had moved, and because they had not fully recalculated, and because sometimes the margin between alive and not alive is 200 meters, and the specific timing of a throttle push. She pushed the throttle harder. The drives howled. Esk rang like a bell as the shockwave from the near miss reached her. Firing, Casso said over the comm. Calm, just the one word. She felt it before she heard it. A deep sub-bass vibration transmitted through the ground and into the air and into the ship. A sound that was more sensation than sound, the mass driver discharging for the first time. And then again. And again. A sequence of brutal mechanical exhalations, each one sending 800 kilograms of dense rock and refined ore accelerating down 140 meters of electromagnetic rail and out into the sky at approximately 12 kilometers per second. The second Varric shot hit the ground 60 meters from the Esk and blew a crater 10 meters wide. The shockwave caught the ship's stern and spun her 40 degrees, and Marin corrected with the vernier thrusters and kept the main drive burning and kept moving. The console was showing hull stress readings that were technically in the yellow, but practically in the red, and would probably be in the red very shortly. 4 away, Casso said, 8 away, 12 away. His voice stayed even the entire time. The man was made of something different from what most people were made of. The third Varric shot missed by 400 meters. Then the Varric ships did something she had not expected. They split. 2 of them continued toward the Esk. The third turned, adjusting its vector. It had identified the mass driver. Casso, she said. Third ship is tracking you. Get clear of the facility. I have 2 more in the queue, he said. Get clear. 2 more shots, Marin, Casso. 14 away, he said. 15. A pause. 16. Running. The third Varric ship fired on the mass driver facility. She saw it on the rear cameras, a blinding energy discharge that turned the facility into light and then into a spreading cloud of vapor, superheated material. She felt the shockwave half a second later, and the console went from yellow to red and held there. She kept the throttle maxed and put as much distance between herself and the remaining 2 Varric ships as the esque overworked drives could manage. Sound off, she said. Pell clear, Pell said. She had evacuated the facility 90 seconds before the shot. Marin had given her the 3-minute warning, and Pell had used it wisely. Orin is with me. He's mobile. Breck, here. His voice was tight. Antenna housing fell on me. I'm okay. Working on getting out. Casso. Silence for 4 seconds. Marin counted them. Here, Casso said. I fell about 15 meters into a drainage culvert when I ran. I think my wrist is broken. A pause. The targeting data is intact. The targeting data, she repeated. I want to know if we hit them, he said. With the patient dignity of a man who has a broken wrist and has just fired 16 mass driver rounds at alien warships and considers the question of impact to be a legitimate scientific interest. She didn't have an answer yet. The 16 slugs were in flight, moving at 12 kilometers per second on ballistic trajectories toward a target that was also moving, and whether the dispersion pattern would intersect with the Varric ship's two positions was a calculation that required data she didn't have yet. She watched the 2 remaining Varric ships on her display. They were still coming toward her, still closing, and she was still running, and the Esk was doing everything she asked of it with the specific reliability of a ship that has been well maintained by people who needed it to keep working. She had a thought in that moment about what it meant to be a salvage crew, what the work actually was. Not the licensed official work, not the debris recovery and asset reclamation, the actual work, the thing underneath the job, which was, you went to the places where things had broken, and you made use of what was still there. You found the hollow sound under the rubble, and you dug. You found the mass driver that the Varric hadn't bothered to destroy because they hadn't realized it was important, and you made it important. You took what the wreckage had left you, and you turned it into something. That was the work. That had always been the work. The first impact registered on the ranging display as a sudden positional anomaly. One of the contacts going from a clean moving point to a smeared, uncertain cloud of data. She stared at it. The anomaly spread and deepened, and she ran the return data through the interpretation filter twice before. She believed what it was telling her. The first Varric ship had been hit. Not destroyed. She couldn't tell if it was destroyed. The return data was too chaotic, but hit, and hit with enough force that its drive signature was completely absent from the display. It was drifting. Whatever the Varric built their warships from, 12,000 tons of kinetic energy, had found something it couldn't dismiss. The second impact came 40 seconds later. Another contact going anomalous. One of the 2 ships still pursuing her. She watched it slow and then stop, and then begin a slow, uncontrolled rotation that the ship's own systems didn't seem to be correcting. The third Varric ship, the one that had destroyed the mass driver, was accelerating away from the system, not toward her, away. She watched its contact signature recede on the display with an emotion that was too complicated and too raw to name precisely, something in the vicinity of, so you can be made to run. The 2 remaining Varric ships were not firing anymore. She brought the Esk around in a slow arc, bleeding off speed, running a systems check as she went. The hull stress readings were coming down from red. The drives were running hot, but within manageable parameters. She had fuel for another 6 hours at combat power, which she was not going to need. She opened the crew channel. Status. Clear, Pell said. Getting out now, Breck said. There was a scraping sound, and then a grunt, and then out. I'm okay. Wrist is definitely broken, Cassos said. I'd like someone to look at it when convenient. Also, did we hit them? 2 out of 3, Marin said. Silence on the channel for a long moment. I'll take it, Casso said. She brought the Esk down near what remained of the mass driver facility and went to find her crew on foot. Pell was already treating Casso's wrist by the time Marin reached them. A clean fracture, she said, straightforward to immobilize. Not ideal, but manageable. Orin was sitting on a piece of rubble nearby, watches her work. Breck came up from the south a few minutes later, moving slightly stiffly but otherwise intact. A gash along his left forearm that Pell assessed as requiring stitching, but not immediately life-threatening. They sat together in the ruins of the facility while Pell worked. The yellow sky was brightening. Early morning, the sun coming up, the smoke from the far end of the colony beginning to thin. Marin looked at the crater where the mass driver used to be. Then she looked at the sky. Third ship ran, Breck said. Yes, where do you think it went? Back to wherever they came from, to report. She paused. What they'll report is that a salvage crew on a dead colony world hit them with an industrial mining apparatus and disabled 2 warships. Nobody said anything to this for a while. That's going to be a strange report to write, Breck said. Very strange, Casso agreed. He winced as Pell tightened the splint, then composed himself back into his usual expression of patient equanimity. The kinetic physics were straightforward. The ballistic spread calculation was straightforward. The only truly uncertain element was whether their armor could withstand 12,000-ton kinetic impact. And apparently it cannot. Apparently, Pell said with the tiniest possible inflection. Nobody knew that, Oren said quietly. He had been saying very little since the shooting started, watching the way a man watches who has learned to reserve his energy for things that require it. About the armor. Nobody had ever tried it. Nobody thought to try it, Breck said. There was something new in his voice now, not the barely contained fury. Something that had replaced it or grown out of it. Something that sounded like a man who has done an impossible thing and is now quietly reorganizing his understanding of what is possible. Marin looked at them. Her crew. 4 people in the ruins of a dead colony, one with a broken wrist and one with a gash in his arm, all of them exhausted and dirty and running on bad coffee and adrenaline and something that was not hope exactly, but was in the same general vicinity. A specific stubborn human insistence on the fact that what they had just done had worked, that the math had been Casso's math, and the timing had been her timing, and the loading had been Breck's loading, and the planning had been all of them, together, improvised in a single night in a bombed-out processing district on a dead colony world, and it had been enough. Not because they were exceptional, but because they had refused to wait, and had used what was in the rubble, and had aimed as carefully as they knew how, and had not missed. Campac response will be here in about 30 hours, she said. We should document everything for the debrief. The signal intercept, the targeting data, the mass driver parameters, the impact records, and the technical specifications for adapting an industrial mass driver for use against warship-class targets, Casso said. He looked up at her with his precise, neutral expression. That information will be useful to someone. Yes, she said. It will. I have a question, Oren said. They looked at him. Why did the third one run, he asked. They still had one functional ship. They still had firepower. Why didn't they finish it? Marin thought about this. It was a good question. The Varric had enormous advantages in every technical dimension. Better weapons, heavier armor, faster ships, the resources of an empire behind them, versus 4 people and a salvage hauler. They had destroyed the mass driver. They had the remaining firepower to destroy the and then destroy whatever compact response was coming. The rational thing, from their perspective, was to press the advantage. I think, she said slowly, that they didn't know what else we had. Silence. They came here expecting a dead colony, she said. They expected wreckage and silence. Instead, they found us. And we did something they didn't expect, with tools they didn't consider. And now they don't know what else we might have. What other dead systems we might turn against them. She paused. The Varric are rational. They do cost-benefit calculations. And I think right now the benefit calculation for pressing the attack includes a variable they can no longer quantify. Breck said. Humans in general, Marin said. The specific thing we apparently do in ruins. Oren was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time since they had pulled him out of the rubble, he smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who is still in tremendous pain, and still very angry, and still possessed of a profound sorrow, but who has found, inside all of that, one small thing to hold on to. My daughter is still on Tereth, he said. Yes, Marin said. She is. The compact response arrived 31 hours later. 4 patrol vessels and a communications frigate, which was a more substantial response than Marin had expected, which told her that whatever was happening at the strategic level, the people in charge had decided that the situation at Karis 9 warranted serious attention. The patrol vessels took up positions around the system. The communications frigate parked in orbit and began broadcasting in every available direction, which Marin understood to be a statement of presence, a declaration that the compact was here, and paying attention, and that whatever had been done to Karis 9 was not going to pass without consequence. She spent 4 hours with the frigate's intelligence officer, a Captain Avit Lorne, who was precise and serious, and asked excellent questions, and listened to the answers with total attention. She walked him through everything. The signal intercept, the repair of the targeting array, the firing solution, the impact data. She gave him Casso's technical notes, which were meticulous and complete, and would, she suspected, become part of some classified weapons development program within about 6 weeks. She described the moment the third Varric ship turned and ran, and she watched his expression process this the way she had processed it herself, with a careful, calibrated, not quite hope. You've given us something, he said when she finished. I gave us something, she said, with 3 other people and a dead colony's mining equipment. I understand the distinction, he said, and she believed that he did. Afterwards, she went back to the Esk and found her crew in the cargo bay. Breck was asleep against the bulkhead, with his repaired arm folded across his chest. Pell was running a systems maintenance check on her medical kit, the same way she maintained all her equipment, systematically, thoroughly, against the next time. Casso was at the table with his tablet, typing one-handed, building what appeared to be a detailed technical model of an industrial mass driver's combat applications, which he would probably share with anyone who asked, and several people who hadn't. Oren was there too, sitting across from Casso, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. He had been offered a bunk on the communications frigate, and had declined. He would take it eventually, she suspected. There were arrangements to be made, survivors to account for, the vast administrative aftermath of a disaster to begin addressing. But for now, he was sitting in her cargo bay, and she understood why. The wreckage was outside. In here, it was just 4 people, worn out and functional, and the quiet that comes after. She sat down at the table and poured herself bad coffee from the thermos that was somehow still not empty. What now? Breck asked from the wall, without opening his eyes. Now the compact handles the strategic piece, she said. That's their job. We gave them what we had. And us? She drank her coffee. It was bad in the specific and familiar way of coffee that has been in a thermos too long. And it was very good. There's a salvage license to deal with, she said. Technically, we discharged the entire ore stockpile of a compact colony without authorization, which is going to require some paperwork. Pell made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Also, Marin continued, the mass driver facility is destroyed, which removes a significant piece of recoverable colony infrastructure from the asset list, and will require an amended salvage report. Also, we have a broken wrist, Casso said without looking up from his typing. Also that. I'll note it in the incident report as work-related. Breck finally opened his eyes and looked at her. You're doing paperwork jokes, he said. That's your version of it's all okay. It's not all okay, she said. 47,000 people are dead, and the Varric are going to need a formal military response, and we are 4 people in a salvage hauler, none of which is okay. But, Breck said, but we dug in the rubble, and we found something useful, and we did the next thing and the thing after that, she said. And Tarath Station is still there, and the 3rd ship ran. She looked at her coffee. That's not okay. But it's something. Breck nodded slowly. He closed his eyes again. Ern was looking at his hands. They weren't trembling anymore. He looked up at Marin, and she looked back at him. And there was a long moment of understanding between 2 people who have been in the same ruins and done the same work, and know precisely what it cost and what it was worth, and how those 2 things sit side by side without canceling each other out. Thank you, he said. She shook her head. Casso did the math. Breck loaded the magazine. Pell kept everyone alive. You told us about the mass driver. And you dug in the rubble, Oren said. That's what salvage crews do, she said. We find what's still useful in the wreckage. She drank her bad coffee. Outside, through the viewport, the yellow sky of Karis 9 was going orange toward evening. The smoke from the far end of the colony had finally stopped. The compact patrol vessels moved in their slow orbits overhead, steady and functional, doing what ships do, maintaining themselves, watching, ready. Somewhere 12 light minutes away, 2 Varric warships were adrift and silent. Somewhere beyond the edge of the system, a 3rd was carrying a report that would, if Marin had read the situation correctly, give certain people in certain places reason to reconsider what the outer systems actually contained. Not just wreckage, not just silence, not just the burnt remains of what had been built and was now gone, but the people who were still here, in the ruins, doing the next thing, finding the hollow sound under the rubble, digging with their hands. Esk was 900 tons of salvage hauler, battle-damaged and running hot, her hull stress still showing yellow in 3 places, her drive signature slightly irregular after the punishment she had taken. She was not a warship. She was not a military asset. She was a working ship in the hands of 4 working people who had, with the specific stubbornness and creativity that sufficiently pressed humans, tend to deploy, turned a dead colony's mining equipment into something that had made a Varric fleet commander turn his surviving ship around and decide that the cost-benefit calculation for pressing the attack was no longer as favorable as it had appeared. Marin finished her coffee. She put the thermos away. She opened the crew channel on the console beside her. Pell, she said, what's Breck's arm look like? Stitches are holding. He'll want to keep it dry for a week. Casso, how's the wrist? Painful, he said, but I can type. He paused. I've nearly finished the preliminary technical document on the mass driver adaptation. I think the targeting approach has broader applications. I think so too. Send it to me when it's done. She looked at the viewport again. The orange sky deepening toward dark, the patrol vessels above. We'll stay another day. Help with the survivor search if there are survivors. Then we file our reports and resupply and move on. Move on where? Breck asked, eyes still closed. She thought about this. There were other outer settlements, other colonies, other places in the vast dark where people had built things in the hope of building more. There were other signals to intercept, and other rubble to dig through, and other dead systems that might have something still functional in them, waiting to be found and used and turned toward the next necessary purpose. The outer systems were full of wreckage. The outer systems were also full of people who had not yet been wrecked, and the distance between those two things was, in the end, a question of what you found in the ruins and what you did with it. Wherever we're needed, she said. The orange sky deepened. The stars came out. Somewhere out there, the Varrock were writing a report that would, in some meeting in some command center far from here, introduce a variable that had not previously been in their calculations, the specific and poorly quantifiable problem of what happens when you leave humans alive in their own wreckage with the remnants of their own tools. The problem, the report would say, if it was written honestly, was that they did not behave as expected. The problem was that they looked at the rubble and found something useful. The problem was that they dug. They always, it turned out, dug. 3 weeks later, Compact Command issued a classified technical directive to all outer system installations and defensive assets. The directive referenced, without naming, a specific salvage operation conducted by a civilian vessel on a destroyed colony world. It outlined a new tactical doctrine for the defense of lightly armed or undefended outer system settlements, industrial infrastructure assessment, mass driver adaptation protocols, and the systematic identification of what Compact Intelligence had begun to call, in their internal documents, legacy kinetic assets. The stuff left in ruins that could still, under the right circumstances, be made to do work. The directive was classified. Marin never saw it. She heard about it, secondhand, 3 months later, from a Compact Intelligence officer she met on a station in the Vela sector. He bought her a drink and told her what had happened, and watched her face while he told her. She listened without expression, the way she listened to most things, taking in the information and filing it without letting it change her face. You started something, the officer said. We fired a mining mass driver at 3 warships, she said. We hit 2. The 3rd ran. You started something, he said again. She drank her drink. It was better than thermos coffee, which was not a high bar. Through the station's viewport, she could see a dozen ships in various states of approach and departure, salvage haulers and freight vessels and a couple of compact patrol ships, and the general ordinary busy traffic of people going about their work in the outer systems, moving between settlements, moving between the places where humans had built things and were building more. We were in the ruins, she said. We found what was there. That's what you do, in ruins. Most people don't, the officer said. Most people do, she said. They just haven't been pushed hard enough yet. She finished her drink. She left the officer at the bar. She went back to the desk where Pell was running a maintenance check and Casso was reading something, and Breck was doing the hull inspection, his arm fully healed now, moving along the exterior of the ship with the comfortable efficiency of a person who knows their work. She climbed aboard. The air recyclers came on. The console displays filled with data. She was home. Outside, in the dark and the distance, the Varrock were still there. The compact response was building. She tracked it the way you track weather in the outer systems, imprecisely but with attention, watching the signals and the ship movements, and the way certain people said certain things in certain rooms. It was going to be a long reckoning. It was not going to be simple or clean or quick. Nothing real ever was. But Terath Station was still there. 40,000 people still alive because a dispersion pattern calculated by a man with a broken wrist had intersected correctly with 3 incoming warships, and because the 3rd ship had turned and run, and because the cost-benefit calculation had changed. That was something. It was not everything. It was something. Marin set the departure course. Lifted off the station dock, her drives cycling up to their familiar vibration, and pushed out through the traffic and into the dark, heading toward the outer systems, toward the next signal, toward whatever was in the rubble that was still worth finding. 6 months after Karis 9, the Varrock hit 4 more outer settlements. Marin learned about each one the same way she learned about most things in the outer systems. Through fragments, through the specific static of bad relay chains, through conversations with other hauler crews at resupply stations, where the coffee was uniformly terrible and the information was uniformly incomplete. The Varric were not repeating the Keras-9 pattern exactly. They were not conducting long orbital bombardments. They were faster now, more precise, and the settlements they chose were smaller. Not 47,000 people, but 5,000, 2,000, once just a single deep space relay station with a crew of 40. They were probing something. Testing response times, testing compact reaction, testing something else that Marin couldn't quite name, but could feel the shape of. The way you feel the shape of a problem before you understand it. They're mapping our gaps, Pell said. They were Small common area, 5 months out from Keras-9, parked in a mid-system resupply dock called Vantage Point that existed primarily to serve salvage and survey crews working the outer arc. The dock was home to maybe 300 people on any given day. Crews cycling through, dock workers, a handful of compact administrative personnel who spent most of their time looking like they wanted to be somewhere else. Marin had been here twice before. She knew the coffee was bad and the information was usually interesting. Gaps in what? Breck asked. He was eating something from a ration pack with the focused efficiency of a man who treats meals as fuel rather than experience. His arm had healed cleanly. Pell had been right about the stitches, response time, coverage, where the compact can get a patrol vessel in under 12 hours versus where it takes 30 or 40. Pell paused. They're not destroying things randomly. They're finding the edges of our ability to respond, and they're pressing on them. They're also finding out something else, Casso said. He had his tablet out, as usual, and had been running something on it for the last 20 minutes while appearing to not be particularly engaged in the conversation. Since Keras-9, 5 of the outer system settlements have done what we did. Not mass drivers. 3 of them used deep core mining charges. 1 used a waste heat ejector from a geothermal plant. 1 did something extremely creative with an electromagnetic ore sorter. In each case, they caused damage to at least 1 Varric ship. In 3 cases, the Varric retreated. He looked up. The Varric are mapping our gaps, yes. But they're also discovering that our gaps are full of creative people with industrial equipment and a great deal of motivation. This was news to Marin. Good news, which was a category she had been experiencing in smaller quantities than usual for the past several months, and she registered it carefully. Where are you getting this data? Compact Intelligence Technical Bulletin, he said. The unclassified summaries. They're being distributed to all licensed salvage and survey operators in the outer systems. I think someone decided that giving us the information was worth the security risk. He set the tablet down. They're calling it Distributed Kinetic Response Doctrine. Apparently it originated from a certain classified directive issued 3 weeks after Keras-9. What does Distributed Kinetic Response Doctrine mean in practice? Breck asked. It means that every outer settlement with any significant industrial infrastructure has been provided with a technical assessment guide for adapting their existing equipment to defensive use. My technical document is referenced, though not attributed by name. He paused. I believe the attribution may be classified. Marin looked at him. How do you feel about that? The physics doesn't care who gets credit, he said. The settlements care whether it works. She nodded. She looked at her coffee, which was bad in a different way from Keras-9 thermos coffee. More watery, less burnt, equally unsatisfying. Through the dock's viewport, she could see a pair of survey vessels powering up for departure, their running lights cycling through their pre-launch sequence, their drives building to a low blue glow. Ordinary work. The ordinary work of the outer systems. Here's what I want to know, Pell said. She had that look, the look of a woman who has identified the single most important thing and is about to state it. The Varric hit 5 settlements after Keras-9. 4 of those settlements are gone. 5 of the settlements hit had people who fought back, 3 of which caused the Varric to retreat. But the Varric haven't stopped. They've changed tactics, but they haven't stopped. No, Marin said. What changes that? The question settled over the table. Outside, the 2 survey vessels completed their pre-launch and lifted away from the dock, their drives brightening as they pushed toward a departure, heading out into the dark. Marin watched them go. Scale, she said. We changed the cost-benefit calculation at Keras-9 for 1 engagement. 5 settlements changed it for 5 engagements. What changes it permanently is 100 settlements. 200 every outer system installation that has anything that could be adapted, all of them ready, all of them with the technical knowledge to do what we did. That's the Compact's job, Breck said. The Compact is doing it, Casso said. Slowly, Marin agreed, and in the meantime, Pell said we do what we do. Marin finished her bad coffee. She set the cup down. She looked at her crew, Pell's precision, Casso's patience, Breck's contained energy, all of them worn in the way of people who have been doing difficult work for a while and have settled into the specific economy of motion, and attention that develops when you do difficult things long enough. They were not heroes. They had never wanted to be heroes. They were a salvage crew with a license and a hauler and a set of skills that had been useful in exactly one extraordinary situation that they had, not sought out and that had sought them instead. There's a settlement called Deep Rock 11, she said. 200 people. Heavy mining operation, Outer Arc. She looked around the table. They're on the projected Varric approach corridor that Casso mapped from the last 4 strike patterns. Nobody said anything for a moment. Campac response time to Deep Rock 11 is approximately 44 hours, Casso said. Yes, we're about 19 hours away. Yes, Breck set down his ration pack. Heavy industrial equipment, heavy mining operation, Marin said. They have industrial equipment. Do they know about the technical assessment guide? I don't know. I'm going to find out. She stood and took her cup to the recycler. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of her crew beginning to move. The small, purposeful sounds of people preparing for the next thing. Not dramatic, not declarative. Just the sounds of people who had done this before and knew how it worked. You found what was in the rubble, you figured out what it could do, and you got it ready before you needed it. You didn't wait for the hollow sound under the debris. You listened for it in advance. Deep Rock 11 was the kind of place that existed in the cracks between the settlements that anyone paid attention to. 212 people, all of them there for a specific reason. The deep core mineral deposits that the surface surveys had located 8 years ago, the kind of rare earth concentrations that made a mining operation economically viable even at this remove from the main systems. They had been there long enough to build something real. A pressurized habitat, a full processing facility, 2 surface mass drivers significantly heavier than the Type 4 on Keras 9, and the specific institutional stubbornness of a community that has survived for 8 years at the edge of where humans were supposed to be. The operations chief was a woman named Torv Sandal. She was 53, broad-shouldered, with the kind of eyes that had been squinting against worklight for too long. She met Marin at the dock with 2 members of her operations staff and the immediate practical manner of someone who has received too many visits from people who wanted to help but not enough from people who actually could. You're the salvage crew from Keras 9, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Marin said. I read the technical document, the unclassified version. Torv looked her over carefully. The way engineers look at equipment, assessing, calibrating. I have some questions about the dispersion pattern calculation. Marin almost smiled. So does everyone. Let me get Casso. They worked for 3 days. It was different from Keras 9. Not an improvised emergency in the middle of ruins, but a planned preparation which had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was time. Time to survey the equipment properly. Time to run the calculations cleanly. Time to train Torv's operations team on the targeting protocols so that the knowledge lived in the settlement and not only in the heads of 4 people from a salvage hauler. The disadvantage was the anticipation, the specific weight of knowing what might be, coming and having enough time to think about it. At Keras 9, they had been moving so fast that there had been no space between thought and action. Here there was space, and the space was full of the faces of 212 people who were going about their work and trusting that the math would hold if it was needed. On the second day, working late in the processing facility, Breck came and found her at the targeting console, where she was running a simulation for the dozenth time, checking and rechecking the projected interception volumes. You think they're coming, he said. I think they might be coming. What's your actual estimate? She stopped running the simulation and looked at him. In the past 6 months, since Keras 9, he had changed in a way she had been watching without commenting on. The barely contained fury was still there, but it had been refined somehow, distilled down from reaction into something more purposeful. He had started asking questions differently, not, what do we do? But, what's your estimate? Not, is this going to work? But, what are the failure modes? He was becoming someone who thought about problems the way she thought about problems, which was not something she had explicitly taught him, and which she found, when she thought about it, quietly significant. 60%, she said, based on the strike pattern projection. They could go for Terath or for the Hassel installations instead, but Deep Rock 11 is on the corridor, and it's isolated, and it's small enough that the compact response time makes it a viable target. 60%, he said. He thought about this. What would change it to 70? A Varric fleet movement in this direction that compact intelligence confirmed. And have they? Not yet, he nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the simulation display. The interception volume was mapped over a local space chart, a cone of probability extending from deep rock, 11 outward toward the projected approach vector. The two mass drivers combined firing solutions, creating an overlapping field that, if the timing was right and the targeting was clean, would put a significant amount of dense mass into the path of any ship approaching from the northeast arc. If they don't come, Breck said, all we've done is help these people be more ready than they were. Yes. And if they do come, then we've done something. Something, he said. That's your whole thing, isn't it? Something. Not everything. Just something. She looked at him. Yes. He nodded slowly. He looked at the simulation for another moment, and then he looked at her with those steady, young, changed eyes. Casso says the targeting is solid. He also says the dispersion pattern we built is better than the one at Karis 9 because we had time to do it right. I know, I checked his work. Did you find anything wrong with it? No. Okay, he said then. I'm going to help Torv's team run the physical load prep. They're good, but they haven't done it before. I know. That's why I'm glad you're here. He almost smiled. He walked back into the facility, heading toward the magazine loading area, his movements easy and economical in the way of someone who knows exactly what the next task is, and is already thinking about the task after that. Marin turned back to the simulation and ran it again, looking for the thing she had missed, because there was always something she had missed, and finding it early was infinitely preferable to finding it during. She ran it 11 more times over the course of the next 12 hours. She didn't find anything she had missed. The Varric came on the 4th day, not 2 ships or 3, 5, a heavier commitment than anything they had seen yet. 5 warships on a direct approach vector from the northeast arc, exactly as projected, coming in at a speed that gave Deep Rock 11 approximately 2 hours from first detection. Marin was in the operations center when the detection hit. She was eating bad coffee, and Torv was eating bad tea, and they were arguing, mildly and productively, about the optimal trigger distance for the mass driver sequence, and then Casso said, very calmly, from his station at the sensor console, contact. 5 Varric warships, northeast arc, 2-hour window. Everything went quiet for a moment. Then Torv reached past Marin and hit the settlement-wide alert, and then Deep Rock 11 became a very busy place. It was different, being the prepared one instead of the improvised one. Torv's team moved with a purpose that came from 3 days of training and the specific focused energy of people defending their home. They knew which console did what. They knew the firing sequence. They knew the evacuation routes, and the blast shelter positions, and the targeting protocols. They had 212 people to protect, and they had 2 heavy mass drivers, and they had 3 days of Casso's patient instruction, and Breck's physical preparation and Marin's obsessive simulation running. And they moved with all of that behind them. Marin coordinated. That was her job here. Not pilot, not technical specialist, not physical loader. Coordinator. The person who held the picture whole while everyone else held their piece of it. She moved between the consoles and the loading teams and the sensor station, and Casso and Breck and Torv. And she kept the picture whole, and she watched the 5 contacts approach on the display, and she did the math, and she called the timing. First mass driver, targeting lock at range, she said. 2-shot cluster, spread pattern Casso 3. Torv relayed it. The first driver fired. The deep sub-bass vibration that Marin remembered from Karis 9 came up through the floor, and she welcomed it the way you welcome a familiar thing, an unfamiliar situation, with something that was not comfort but was in the same direction. Second driver, sequence pattern Casso 5, she said. Wait for my mark. The 5 Varric contacts adjusted their vectors. They had detected the first shots. Of course they had. The mass driver's targeting emission was detectable. That was a physical fact, and they were splitting, 3 continuing the approach and 2 peeling off to flank, which was exactly the scenario she and Casso had modeled on the 2nd day, the one that had required the most significant revision to the interception pattern. Mark, she said. The second driver fired, and fired again. And again. The operations center windows were polarized automatically when the first Varric return fire came in, a coherent energy discharge that hit the surface approximately 400 meters from the habitat dome, close enough to feel as a concussive shudder through the floor, but not close. Enough to breach anything critical. The polarization cleared and Marin could see the impact site through the windows. A glass-smooth crater in the rock still glowing. Targeting us, Casso said. They know exactly where we are. They always know where we are after the first shot, Marin said. That's not the plan. Second cluster, Torv. Torv fired. The second Varric return shot hit the surface closer, 200 meters, and this time the shutter was hard enough to knock people off balance. Marin stayed on her feet by virtue of having planted them carefully in anticipation of exactly this, because she had done this before, and she knew the timing of the shutter. She looked at the contact display. The first contact cluster was anomalous. 2 of the 3 contacts that had maintained the direct approach were showing the specific positional chaos that meant kinetic impact. Not destroyed, but hit. Both of them. Third driver. Torv started. Hold. Marin was watching the display. The remaining 3 contacts, the 2 flanking ships, and the 1 center ship still on approach, were adjusting. The 2 flankers had pulled back. The center ship was continuing, but its speed had dropped. Marin, Breck said. He was at the secondary console. Center contact is slowing. I see it. Why is it slowing? She thought about this for 1 compressed second. The center ship slowing down, the flankers pulling back. Why would a warship slow down when it had successfully suppressed the defending mass driver facility? They don't know if the third driver is ready, she said. They took 2 hits from the first 2 drivers. They don't know how many more we have or where they are. Silence. Outside, the settlement was very still. The 2 mass drivers were visible from the operations center windows, massive dark shapes against the gray-brown rock, angled at the sky, perfectly still. Let them think about it, she said. Think about it, Torv repeated, not understanding. Give them 30 seconds to make a decision. While they're deciding, they're not firing. 23 seconds passed. The center contact continued to decelerate. The 2 flankers held their position. Then, at 24 seconds, all 3 remaining contacts began to accelerate. Away from Deep Rock 11. Not directly away, a lateral burn, a repositioning move, carrying them around the system rather than toward it. The classic movement of a force that has decided the cost of pressing the attack is higher than the benefit of the objective. They're breaking off, Casso said. His voice was as even as always, but she had known him long enough to hear what was underneath it. The operations center went very quiet. Then Torv let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding since the alert, a slow, controlled exhale, and looked at Marin with an expression that was complicated in the specific way of a person who has just survived something they are not yet ready to process. You said let them think about it, Torv said. Yes. You were counting on them, not knowing we only had 2 drivers. Prepared positions don't advertise their inventory, Marin said. That's not a tactic. That's just physics. We need a 3rd driver, Torv said. Almost to herself, we need to actually have what we pretended to have. Yes, Marin said. You do. I'll send you the installation parameters before we leave. She paused. Also, Casso has an updated version of the targeting document, the 5th edition. It incorporates everything from this engagement. How many editions are there? 5 now. Marin looked at the display. The 5 Varric contacts were receding. 2 of them were still showing anomalous signatures, running but damaged. 3 were intact. The math was different from Keras 9, different from anything simple, but the direction was the same. The cost-benefit calculation had shifted, and the shift had been bought with physics and preparation, and the specific refusal of 212 people to be a target that couldn't answer back. How many places have this? Torv asked. The technical document? A lot of them now. The compact has been distributing it. Marin thought about this. The problem isn't distribution. The problem is that every place that gets the document still needs someone to help them implement it, and there's only 1 crew doing that systematically. Your crew. My crew, yes. Torv looked at her for a long moment. There are other salvage crews, survey crews, industrial support vessels. You're not the only people who know how to do this. We're not. Marin agreed. Then why aren't they doing it? Because no one has asked them yet in the right way, she said. Someone has to go around and ask. Torv's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you volunteering? I'm noting that the capacity exists. She paused. Casso has already written the training material. I've been running the simulations long enough that I can build a standardized version. Breck has trained every loading crew we've worked with to the same standard. Pell has the medical protocols. She looked at her hands, and then up at Torv. This started as 4 people in the ruins doing the next things. The next thing got bigger. It did, Torv said. So we do the next thing. The training program that grew out of Deep Rock 11 took 18 months to build and never had an official name. People called it various things in various places. The Salvage Protocol, the Voss Method, the Kinetic Assessment Doctrine, the Wreckage Curriculum. Marin never gave it a name herself, partly because naming it would have made it feel more finished than it was, and partly because the thing itself resisted the kind of naming that suggested a single origin. It had not come from one person or one crew. It had come from Casso's math and Breck's physical preparation and Pell's systematic approach. And from Dav Oren knowing about the mass driver, and from Torv Sandal needing a third driver, and from the dozens of settlement Sarauschlaschen's crews who had asked questions and then answered them, and then taught the answers to the crews on the next settlement. The Varric continued to strike outer system installations. In that 18 months, they hit 19 settlements. Of the 19, 11 had been reached by the training program. Of those 11, 9 mounted successful defenses. Not always without cost. Some settlements took damage, some took casualties. One mass driver facility was destroyed before it could fire. But 9 out of 11 Varric attacks on prepared settlements ended with the Varric fleet pulling back and at least 1 warship damaged. The 2 settlements that were not successfully defended had received the technical document but had not had time for an implementation visit before the attack. They were destroyed, and the specific sorrow of those losses sat in Marin's chest in a way that was heavy and permanent, the weight of what the math couldn't fix and what time didn't allow. She did not resolve this grief. She carried it the way you carry the things that drive you to move faster, to reach more places, to make sure the next settlement and the one after that had what they needed before it was needed. The Compact, in that 18 months, built 17 new patrol vessels and repositioned their outer system force coverage significantly. The classified version of the technical document was adopted as standard compact defensive infrastructure doctrine for Class B and Class C installations. A compact admiral, in a briefing that Marin read about secondhand through the usual chain of other hauler crews and bad coffee at resupply stations, described the outer system defensive transformation as the most significant force-multiplying development in compact military history that cost the Compact exactly nothing, because civilians funded and implemented it with their own equipment and their own time. Marin thought this was almost right. It had cost something. It had cost 47,000 people on Karis 9, and the various casualties of the 19 subsequent attacks in the 2 settlements that had been destroyed because time ran out. The Admiral had meant budget, and in that sense he was correct. But the ledger had entries that didn't show up in budget documents, and Marin kept those entries in her own accounting where they belonged. She was at Vantage Point again, 16 months after Deep Rock 11, when Breck found her at the viewport and stood next to her and said, "There's a report." "Which one?" "Compact Intelligence." Early summary. 3 Varric fleet movements in the last month, all of them redirected. He paused. Not to other targets. Redirected back. Pulled back from the outer arc. She turned to look at him. He was different from the person who had boarded her ship 2.5 years ago in the Vela. Different, even from the person at Karis 9. He was not exactly older, though he was that too. He was something harder to name. The specific quality of a person who has found out what they're made of and reorganized accordingly. "All 3? She said. "All 3. Compact thinks it might be a temporary reposition. But intelligence is also saying the strike rate has been dropping. The cost-benefit calculation is changing." She turned back to the viewport. The dock was busy. Haulers and survey vessels and a couple of compact patrol ships, ordinary traffic, the ordinary work of the outer systems. Someone was loading freight onto a vessel 2 bays over. A physical job being done efficiently by people who knew what they were doing. "It's not over," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it's different. Yes, the 3rd ship ran," he said. Not from Karis 9 specifically, he was using it as shorthand, a reference point for something larger. A lot of ships ran. A lot of settlements dug in the rubble and found what was there, she said. "That's what changed. That's what you started." She shook her head. "That's what was already there. We just showed that it was worth digging for." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Casso's writing a 6th edition." "I know." He showed me the draft. "The section on curved path ballistic compensation is significantly better than the 5th edition. He's also being asked to present it at a compact defense conference." "I know that too. Are you going?" "No," she said. "There's a settlement on the outer arc called Kellenmore. 400 people, deep survey operation, outer edge of the projected corridor." She paused. "I think someone should go talk to them about their industrial equipment." Breck nodded slowly, with the look of a man who knew this was coming and had already made his peace with it. "How far?" 23 hours. "When do we leave?" She turned away from the viewport. The dock around her was full of sound, engines and work and voices and the perpetual background hum of a place where people were doing things, making things, building things, maintaining the vast, improbable human project of being present in places that were difficult and far and uncertain. She had been part of that project for 11 years now, and it had never stopped being difficult, and she had never stopped thinking it was worth doing. Now, she said, we leave now. They left now. The Esk. Lifted from vantage point, with its drive cycling to their familiar vibration, and pushed out through the traffic and into the dark, heading toward the outer systems, toward the next settlement, toward the 400 people in Kellenmore who were going about their work and didn't know yet what was in their rubble. They would know soon. That was the job. That had always been the job.